We know Toronto today as the beating heart of Canada. It's the Great White North's largest city with a population of 6.20 million, according to the 2021 Canadian census. Naturally, it's also Canada's most important city, economically and financially, being home to the Toronto Stock Exchange and producing just about half of all of the country's manufactured goods. Ask any non-Canadian what they think Canada's capital city is, and there might be a 50% chance they say Toronto, not Ottawa. Toronto hasn't always been Canada's preeminent city. Up until recently, that title belonged to Canada's second largest city, Montreal, with a population of 4.20 million. So what happened? How did Toronto beat Montreal to become Canada's #1 city? The 1971 census counted Montreal's population at 2.82 million, with Toronto not too far behind at 2.70 million. It was also during this time, the period spanning the 60s to the 80s, that a series of political and economic changes began to take shape along the Laurentian corridor. Quebec was undergoing a period of intense nationalism called the Quiet Revolution, the culmination of centuries of resentment against Anglophone rule since the end of the 70 Years' War. Immigration has always been a main driver behind Canada's population growth since the 18th century. However, the response to immigrants in French Canada has been more mixed, to say the least. The majority of these immigrants were Anglophones. Hence, more than the rest of the country, the Quebecois tended to view immigrants as a demographic threat, fearing they would one day outnumber French Canadians if their numbers were left unchecked. The Quiet Revolution saw French Canadians assume more power in the Quebec government. The voting age was lowered, the hydroelectric industry was nationalized, and perhaps most importantly, the Quebec government would enact Bill 101, or the Charter of the French Language, which mandated French be the official language of business, school, and government. This effectively dissuaded many English-speaking immigrants from settling in Quebec. The province also saw terrorist attacks by separatists, namely the Quebec Liberation Front, who were responsible for the 1969 bombing of the Montreal Stock Exchange and the 1970 assassination of the Deputy Premier of Quebec, Pierre Laporte. This political violence, and finally, a 1980 provincial referendum discussing Quebec's possible secession from Canada, created a climate of economic uncertainty that drove down investor confidence. Banks and corporations began to move their main offices from Montreal, and even the Bank of Montreal now has its operating headquarters in Toronto. In 1967, Canada introduced a points-based system that ranked immigrants mainly on skills, education, and knowledge of either English or French. This new policy, along with many other changes to immigration policy ending discrimination based on race or nationality, made Canada an appealing destination for immigrants. English, being the more widely spoken language worldwide than French, made Anglophone cities like Toronto and Vancouver more convenient options for immigrants. In 1976, Toronto would surpass Montreal as the country's largest city. The 1991 census counted Toronto's population at 3.90 million, with Montreal not too far behind at 3.22 million. This gap would only increase in the next few decades. By 2011, Toronto's population is 5.58 million. Montreal's was 3.82.